Conflict has always been the fire that tests humanity. Whether in the form of armies clashing beneath banners of empires, or in the quiet yet equally destructive disputes that unfold in our homes, workplaces, and nations today, the essence of conflict remains the same. What we see in the 21st century, cyber warfare, corporate rivalries, political polarization, and social media outrage, is not fundamentally new. It is merely the old human passions finding new stages on which to perform their tragedy. The Romans fought with iron swords. We fight with words that cut just as deeply. The Greeks deployed phalanxes. We deploy tweets and algorithms. But beneath the different uniforms of history, the soldiers are the same. Human beings governed by pride, fear, greed, ambition, and insecurity. To understand modern conflict, one must look backward, to the voices that have endured centuries, because they understood not only war, but human nature itself. The Stoics, those philosophers who lived through the turbulence of empires, assassinations, civil wars, and personal betrayals, wrote down observations that still speak with alarming accuracy to the battles we wage today. They remind us that conflict is never just a matter of weapons or resources. It is a matter of the mind, of desires colliding and egos refusing to yield. Consider the young Marcus Aurelius, long before he became the emperor we now call a philosopher king. He was trained not only in governance and law, but also in warfare. He was destined to rule an empire that, at its edges, was constantly under threat. And yet, when he put pen to parchment in his private meditations, he did not write about the glory of conquering enemies or the strategies of war. Instead, he wrote about controlling his anger, reminding himself not to be enslaved by the faults of others, warning his mind against arrogance, cruelty, or despair. He understood something essential. Every conflict in the outer world is first a reflection of conflict within. Modern conflict may look clean and bloodless compared to the brutality of ancient warfare. We see missiles launched from afar, soldiers fighting through drones, arguments ignited through screens. But the reality is that the human cost remains devastating. Families torn apart, reputations destroyed, inner peace shattered. These are casualties as real as any fallen soldier on the battlefield of old. Seneca, writing letters to a friend while surrounded by political conspiracies and the looming threat of imperial wrath, said that anger is a form of temporary madness. How much of modern conflict is precisely this? Madness disguised as politics, as ideology, as self-defense. Wars of nations often begin as wars of ego. Picture the ancient battlefield, dust rising, shields clashing, a line of soldiers waiting for the horn to sound. Now picture the modern equivalent, a boardroom where executives argue over market dominance, each one unwilling to back down. A political debate where rhetoric is sharpened into weapons to humiliate opponents rather than seek truth. An online mob fueled by outrage, destroying reputations with a speed that outpaces reflection. The stage has changed, but the script is familiar. And so is the advice from the ancients. You cannot stop others from seeking conflict, but you can choose how you meet it. Epictetus, once a slave, understood conflict in its rawest form. He could not control his master's cruelty, the injustice of his circumstances, or the fact that society treated him as property. Yet from this position of profound vulnerability, he taught a truth that modern people often forget. Our greatest power lies in governing ourselves. It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. In those words, we find the map for facing conflict today. Because the truth is, most modern conflicts escalate not because of the first strike, but because of the reaction, the retaliation, the refusal to pause, the inability to master one's temper. The ancients also knew that conflict is seductive. War drums excite crowds, the promise of victory flatters our pride, the idea of punishing an enemy tempts our sense of justice. But they warned against mistaking destruction for triumph. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that a man who harms another also harms himself, for he corrodes his own nature. Modern conflict, whether in the form of a corporate feud or a global war, often leaves both sides diminished. There is no true winner when bitterness consumes the soul. And yet, there is something else the Stoics understood. Conflict is inevitable. The world will not become gentle simply because we wish it to. People will insult, nations will scheme, rivals will provoke, and even our closest loved ones will, at times, wound us. To hope otherwise is to live in fantasy. Instead, the wise prepare. As soldiers of the mind, we must rehearse our responses long before the arrows fly. Just as Roman legions trained tirelessly for battles that might never come, so too must we discipline our inner lives, preparing to face injustice, cruelty, or misunderstanding without surrendering to rage or despair. So, when we speak of ancient wisdom in the context of modern conflict, we are not dealing with relics or outdated ideas. We are dealing with timeless strategies for surviving the storms of human existence. The battles may look different, but the essence of combat, pride versus humility, passion versus reason, vengeance versus mercy, remains eternal. In today's conflicts, from the smallest quarrel at the dinner table to the most terrifying clash of nations, we must choose what role we play. Do we add to the fire with our fury, or do we hold firm like a rock against the waves, as Epictetus advised? Do we seek only to conquer, or do we also seek to understand? Ancient wisdom tells us that the greatest victory is not over the enemy, but over the destructive impulses within ourselves. And thus, as we step into the heart of this reflection, we begin with this understanding: the fire of conflict, whether ancient or modern, is the same. It consumes those who feed it with ungoverned passion, but it reveals strength in those who endure it with reason. The Stoics left us not merely words, but weapons, not of violence, but of clarity, endurance, and discipline. And these, more than any sword or spear, are the tools we need to face the conflicts of our own age. When we study conflict across centuries, one truth rises above all others: human nature does not change. The weapons may evolve, the uniforms may look different, the languages may shift, but beneath these shifting surfaces, the same impulses drive us: pride, fear, envy, greed, lust for power, insecurity. These are the timeless roots of conflict. The Stoics, observing the turbulence of their own era, warned us repeatedly that until a man masters himself, he will remain at war with others. And this is as true in our age of smartphones and satellites as it was in the age of swords and scrolls. Seneca once wrote that anger is the most hideous and frenzied of all emotions, capable of overturning kingdoms and destroying lives. He compared it to an illness that spreads rapidly and consumes reason. If we pause to reflect on modern times, we see his words illustrated every day. Leaders lash out in press conferences, citizens erupt in protests that descend into violence, families fracture over misunderstandings that could have been resolved with patience. Anger, that ancient fire, still burns through the human heart, and no amount of technological progress has extinguished it. Consider envy. In Rome, envy caused conspiracies, betrayals, and assassinations. It pushed senators to plot against emperors, generals to undermine their rivals, and friends to turn on one another. Today, envy thrives in subtler but equally destructive ways. Social media amplifies it, showing us curated versions of others' lives, their wealth, beauty, or success, provoking resentment in those who compare themselves. Wars of status are fought not only in the halls of government, but also in the endless scroll of feeds, where envy can poison a heart in silence. The ancients recognized envy as a futile war, a battle one fights against shadows. And yet, humanity returns to it again and again. Greed, too, is ancient. The Romans sought wealth through conquest, plundering foreign lands, exploiting slaves, and hoarding treasures. Today, greed disguises itself as ambition, as economic growth, as progress. Corporations devastate environments in pursuit of profit. Politicians sell their integrity for campaign funds. Individuals exploit others for personal gain. The surface language has changed. Stock markets instead of chariots, corporations instead of kingdoms. but the impulse remains identical. The Stoics would look at our financial crises, our wars over resources, our exploitation of weaker nations, and they would not be surprised. They would remind us that wealth is indifferent, that greed enslaves the soul long before it enslaves others. Fear, perhaps, is the most primal of all. The Romans feared barbarian invasions, Slade uprisings, betrayal in the Senate. We fear terrorist attacks, economic collapse, losing our jobs, or being humiliated in front of others. Fear fuels our conflicts more than we admit. Nations launch preemptive wars not always out of aggression, but out of fear of being attacked first. Individuals lash out not because they are powerful, but because they are afraid of appearing weak. Fear has always been a dangerous general, leading humanity into battles that need not be fought. Marcus Aurelius warned himself not to let the fear of death, pain, or dishonor corrupt his reason. If he, the emperor of the mightiest empire of his time, wrestled with fear, how much more should we recognize it in ourselves? The Stoics remind us that, while these passions are natural, they are also conquerable. Human nature may not change, but our response to it can. This is the heart of Stoic practice, distinguishing between what is within our control and what is not. I cannot stop another man from being greedy, but I can refuse to let his greed dictate my peace. I cannot stop envy from rising in me when I see someone more fortunate, but I can question its logic and dissolve it with reason. I cannot prevent fear from knocking on the door of my heart, but I can choose whether I invite it in to stay. This recognition that human impulses are eternal, yet manageable, is where ancient wisdom becomes urgently relevant for modern conflict. Because if we believe that technology alone will civilize us, we deceive ourselves. History shows otherwise. The same nations that put men on the moon have also dropped bombs on civilians. The same societies that boast of freedom and progress still struggle with violence, corruption, and injustice. Humanity has never lacked for inventions. It has always lacked for mastery over itself. Epictetus taught that we must not blame others for their ignorance, for they act according to their beliefs. A man who harms another believes, in that moment, that it is justified. A nation that wages war believes, in that moment, that it is necessary. The problem is not ignorance of tools or strategies, but ignorance of wisdom. And this ignorance persists because, while civilizations teach mathematics and engineering, they rarely teach virtue. The ancients understood that until virtue is cultivated, the passions will dominate and conflict will flourish. Modern conflict, then, is not a sign of modernity, but of continuity. We are repeating ancient patterns with modern weapons. The real war has never been against foreign enemies. It has always been against ourselves. Seneca put it simply, we are not harmed by the insults of others, but by our own estimation of them. In this truth lies the key. We suffer in conflict not only because others strike at us, but because we interpret those strikes through our ego. Strip away ego, and much of conflict dissolves. If human nature is immovable, what hope do we have? The Stoics would say, the hope lies not in changing the world, but in changing how we live within it. We cannot reform all of society, but we can reform ourselves. And this self-mastery becomes contagious. A man who refuses to be provoked teaches others by example. A leader who remains calm in crisis prevents hysteria from spreading. A parent who teaches a child to handle frustration plants seeds of future peace. Small acts of wisdom ripple outward, challenging the tyranny of human nature by showing that reason can, at times, prevail over passion. Thus, when we look at modern conflict, whether in wars broadcast on global news or in the daily battles of personal life, we should not despair at humanity's failures. Instead, we should see them as proof of the Stoics' relevance. They diagnosed the disease long ago, and their prescription has not expired. The passions of men and women will always stir the fire of conflict. But wisdom, courage, and discipline, virtues that do not age, are still the tools by which we can stand against that fire. To the Roman mind, conflict was not chaos, but strategy. No legion marched without discipline. No battle was entered without calculation. Soldiers drilled endlessly, shields polished, swords sharpened, movements rehearsed until instinct replaced hesitation. Victory, they believed, belonged not to chance, but to preparation. And here, too, the Stoics saw an analogy for life. For if conflict is inevitable, whether with enemies abroad or with challenges within, then we must prepare our defenses and refine our attacks. But the Stoics' weapons were not spears and arrows. They were habits of thought, sharpened by reason and hardened by discipline. Imagine Marcus Aurelius, surrounded by military advisors, preparing to defend Rome's northern frontier against tribes that threatened the empire. He listened to strategies of terrain and supply lines, but in his private writings, he outlined a different campaign: how to guard his mind against despair, how to protect his reason from fear, how to attack arrogance and cruelty with humility and restraint. For Marcus, the emperor of a vast and fragile empire, the true fortress was within, and its walls were built brick by brick through practice. The first defense in the Stoic arsenal was perception. Epictetus taught that events themselves are neutral. It is our judgments that wound us. If we can learn to strip events of their emotional coloring, they lose much of their power. An insult is just sound. A loss is just change. A setback is just a new circumstance. This shield, held firmly, blocks many arrows before they pierce the heart. Yet it requires constant vigilance, for the mind loves to paint insults as mortal wounds and inconveniences as catastrophes. To hold the shield steady is to remind ourselves daily, this cannot harm my character unless I allow it. Roman soldiers were known for their armor, layered and tested, protecting them from the chaos of battle. The Stoic equivalent was daily discipline, small, repeated actions that hardened the mind against weakness, rising early, enduring discomfort without complaint, practicing voluntary hardship. These were not punishments, but training. Seneca urged his students to eat coarse bread at times, to sleep on a hard bed, to remind themselves that luxury is not necessary for survival. Such exercises built resilience, ensuring that when true hardship arrived, the soul did not collapse. In modern life, discipline remains armor, waking with intention, controlling appetites, practicing silence in the face of provocation. With discipline, one does not enter conflict naked. Defense alone is not enough. At times, we must strike, but the Stoic sword is reason, cutting through illusion and exposing truth. When anger rises, reason dissects it. What exactly has been harmed? Is my dignity truly diminished by the words of another? When fear surges, reason interrogates, what am I afraid of losing, and was it ever truly mine? When envy poisons, reason asks, does the good of another reduce my own? The sword of reason does not slash flesh, but it slays illusions, and in doing so, it wins battles without bloodshed. Roman legions fought in formation, shields locked, each soldier protected by the man beside him. Likewise, the Stoics emphasized the strength of community. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that humans are born for cooperation, like the hands or the feet. Conflict often flourishes in isolation, where pride exaggerates offenses and loneliness distorts perspective. But when one stands among wise companions, their shields reinforce our own. Friends who embody patience remind us to hold back. Mentors who embody courage inspire us to advance. To fight alone is dangerous. To fight in community is to multiply resilience. A Roman general knew that retreat was not always defeat. Sometimes it was strategy. The Stoics, too, advised withdrawal when passions threatened to overwhelm. Seneca recommended silence when anger surged, for words spoken in rage are arrows that cannot be recalled. Epictetus suggested stepping back from insults, refusing to wrestle in the mud where both emerge stained. Retreat in this sense is not cowardice, but wisdom, the recognition that the battle must be fought later, with cooler blood and sharper reason. How many modern conflicts would dissolve if people mastered the art of stepping back before retaliating? The Stoics practice what we might call mental war games. Marcus Aurelius rehearsed in the morning what insults or obstacles he might face, so that when they arrived, he was not caught unarmed. This premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, was a shield and a training ground. Expect betrayal, and its sting lessens. Expect hardship, and it cannot break you. Expect misunderstanding, and you will not collapse when it comes. The Romans drilled so they would not falter. The Stoics drilled so their minds would not stumble. If we translate these strategies into modern life, their relevance becomes obvious. The shield of perception helps us face social media outrage without being consumed by it. The armor of discipline protects us when crises strip away comforts. The sword of reason allows us to cut through manipulative rhetoric in politics or advertising. The formation of community grounds us when the world feels hostile. The art of retreat spares us from regrettable words in arguments with loved ones, and preemptive drills prepare us for layoffs, rejections, or losses that would otherwise crush us. Yet the Stoics also warned, strategy without practice is useless. A sword left in its scabbard rusts. A shield unused grows heavy. Discipline not exercised weakens. One cannot simply admire Stoic wisdom from a distance. It must be lived, tested, wielded. Conflict will not wait for us to read another book or reflect another hour. It comes suddenly, and only the prepared can meet it calmly. In the end, the Stoic strategies of defense and attack are not about destroying others, but about preserving the self. They remind us that the true enemy is not the rival across the battlefield, but the passions that betray us from within. The soldier who loses his temper has already lost the war, even if he wins the fight. The leader who succumbs to pride has already doomed his cause, even if he claims victory. Only the one who holds firm to reason and discipline can claim a triumph that endures. Thus, the Stoics leave us with this vision. Life itself is a campaign, each day a skirmish, each choice a movement on the battlefield. If we would endure, if we would prevail, we must arm ourselves not with iron, but with wisdom. Shields of perception, armor of discipline, swords of reason. These are the legions of the mind. And with them, we march into the conflicts of the modern world, not as victims of chaos, but as disciplined warriors of the soul. Now some exciting news. Our channel now offers a members club. By joining it, you'll unlock exclusive benefits, deeper content dives, and personal insights. Join us on this journey and let's build a meaningful life together. And I also humbly ask you to leave a comment, as it helps my channel immensely. If you do not know what to comment, just write "better every day" so I know you reached this far. And don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Also, I've linked some books on Stoicism that helped me become the man I am today, and will also help you achieve a Stoic mindset. Wars are measured in casualties, treaties, and territories lost or gained. Yet the Stoics would remind us that the deepest costs of conflict are often invisible, hidden beneath statistics and unrecorded by history. The loss of peace of mind, the erosion of trust, the bitterness that corrodes families and nations. These wounds bleed quietly, but they endure far longer than the clash of steel. If the ancients saw this truth in their brutal world, how much more relevant is it in ours, where conflicts often unfold without visible violence, yet leave souls scarred all the same? Consider the civil wars of Rome. The Senate debated, armies marched, blood was spilled, and leaders rose and fell. But the cost that lingered was less visible. A society fractured by suspicion, neighbors afraid of one another, loyalties bought and betrayed. Cicero once wrote that even when wars end, the hearts of men remain unsettled. This reality echoes through modern conflicts. After a political campaign, even when ballots are counted, friendships remain broken, communities remain divided, families continue to sit in silence at dinner tables, split by ideology. The war on the surface ends, but the war in the heart continues. The Stoics understood this lingering cost. Seneca warned that resentment is like drinking poison, while waiting for the other man to die. Conflict plants seeds of resentment that can grow for decades, shaping the character of those who refuse to let go. A soldier may leave the battlefield, but if hatred remains, he carries the war with him into every relationship, every decision, every sleepless night. Likewise, in personal conflicts, the fight may end, apologies may be spoken, yet the bitterness of words lingers, coloring future trust. This is the invisible tax of conflict. It continues charging interest long after the principal event is over. Modern life provides countless examples. In the workplace, a single power struggle can leave years of quiet hostility between colleagues, undermining cooperation, sabotaging creativity. In politics, rival factions may claim victory, but the distrust between citizens can outlast generations, crippling progress. In families, siblings may quarrel over inheritance, winning property but losing relationships. The Stoics would ask, what is the true cost of such victories? For what profit is there in winning a lawsuit but losing your peace, in securing an argument but poisoning your marriage, in dominating a debate but alienating your children? Marcus Aurelius, who commanded legions on distant frontiers, carried with him the heavy knowledge that every victory demanded a price. Even when Rome triumphed, soldiers did not return unchanged. The blood they spilled was not only on the ground, but on their consciences. He reminded himself that human life is short, fragile, and sacred, a truth often forgotten in the intoxication of conquest. Today, though few of us lead armies, we too forget. We sacrifice inner calm to prove ourselves right. We surrender our serenity to punish others. We trade peace for pride. In these exchanges, we lose more than we gain. One of the most dangerous costs of conflict is the distortion of perception. In war, propaganda makes enemies appear less than human, justifying cruelty. In personal battles, anger paints the other as entirely evil, erasing their humanity. Seneca warned against this simplification, urging his students to remember that those who wrong us do so not because they are monsters, but because they are mistaken. To forget this is to allow conflict to corrupt our vision, to let hatred blind us to the shared humanity of those we oppose. And once our vision is distorted, reconciliation becomes nearly impossible. There is also the cost of time. Wars devour decades, but so do grudges. A man who spends years replaying an insult has sacrificed his days to shadows. A woman who nurses resentment against a former friend wastes her future in loyalty to the past. The Stoics placed enormous value on time, calling it our most precious possession. Seneca wrote, "We are not given a short life, but we make it short, for we waste it." How many lives are shortened not by death, but by years squandered in inner battles? Conflict steals our days, our joy, and our presence. The invisible cost extends to health as well. Ancient physicians observed how bitterness and worry could weaken the body, and modern science confirms what the Stoics intuited. Stress from unresolved conflict corrodes the immune system, elevates blood pressure, disrupts sleep. A grudge is not only a spiritual wound, but a physical one. The body carries the burden of wars. The mind refuses to end. Thus, conflict continues its destruction long after the battlefield has grown silent. And yet, the Stoics did not counsel despair. They taught recognition. By seeing clearly the invisible costs, we are less tempted to rush into quarrels, less seduced by the false glamour of victory. Epictetus told his students to ask, before entering conflict, what price am I willing to pay? He did not mean coins or casualties, but inner peace, trust, time, and health. Too often, we enter battles without counting these costs, only to discover later that the price was far greater than we imagined. The path forward, then, is not to eliminate conflict, for that is impossible, but to choose our battles wisely. Some are necessary to defend the innocent, to resist injustice, to protect truth. But many are trivial, fights over pride, over recognition, over petty grievances. The Stoics would say, Let go of the battles that shrink your soul. Preserve your strength for the struggles that matter, the ones that test your virtue, not your vanity. The invisible cost of conflict reminds us of a final truth. Peace is not weakness, but strength. To walk away from insult, to forgive an enemy, to let go of bitterness. These acts require more courage than retaliation. Anyone can strike, not everyone can restrain. Anyone can hate, not everyone can heal. To choose peace when anger tempts us is to choose not only freedom from others, but freedom from ourselves. The true victory is not the silencing of another voice, but the preservation of one's own soul. And this victory is measured not in territory or applause, but in the quiet strength of a mind uncorrupted by hatred. When most people think of victory, they imagine parades, banners, applause, or the humiliation of an enemy. History books are filled with such triumphs. Generals entering conquered cities, leaders standing on podiums, individuals boasting after winning lawsuits or arguments. Yet the Stoics consistently warned us, the most important victories are rarely visible. The world may not applaud them, history may not record them, but they are the only victories that truly endure. Marcus Aurelius commanded legions and ruled an empire, yet in his private reflections, he dismissed military triumphs as fleeting shadows. The applause of the crowd fades. The laurel crowns gather dust. The soldiers who cheered will one day curse. But when he restrained his anger, when he forgave a betrayal, when he kept his mind clear in chaos, these were victories no one else could see, but he knew they were real. For the Stoics, mastery over the self was the highest conquest, one that no external enemy could ever overturn. Consider the opposite. History offers countless examples of men who conquered nations but could not conquer themselves. Alexander the Great subdued vast territories, yet died young, consumed by drinking, rage, and restlessness. Julius Caesar bent the republic to his will, but could not shield himself from ambition and envy, which eventually led to his assassination. In modern times, leaders of corporations or governments often achieve outward success while their private lives collapse under the weight of addiction, pride, or despair. These men and women won battles the world could see, but lost the war within. The Stoics would call that defeat. Invisible victories, on the other hand, rarely receive monuments. No statues are erected for the husband who swallows his pride to preserve harmony in his marriage. No headlines celebrate the executive who remains calm during a crisis instead of panicking. No history books honor the citizen who forgives an insult instead of escalating it into violence. And yet, these victories matter more than battles fought with swords or speeches. They preserve peace, dignity, and integrity, treasures that, once lost, no external conquest can restore. The Stoics compared visible victories to riches, dazzling but unstable. Seneca reminded his readers that fortune gives and takes at will. A man who boasts today of triumph may tomorrow be brought low by chance. But invisible victories are immune to fortune. No one can strip you of your calm response to insult, your refusal to be enslaved by anger, your ability to remain generous in the face of envy. These victories are eternal because they depend on virtue, not circumstance. Modern conflict offers many opportunities for such victories. When insulted online, the instinct is to retaliate with sharper words. But if you remain silent or respond with calm reason, you have achieved a triumph greater than silencing your opponent. You have mastered yourself. When colleagues scheme against you, the instinct is to repay cunning with cunning. But if you refuse to compromise your integrity, you have won a battle invisible to others but decisive for your soul. When fear whispers that you must compromise values to survive, and you refuse, you have struck down an enemy more dangerous than any rival. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that the applause of others was worthless, that one must act according to nature, not opinion. He knew that invisible victories are lonely, for they are rarely acknowledged. To resist temptation when no one is watching, to endure insult without witnesses, to practice mercy in secret. These do not bring praise. Yet the Stoics would say praise is irrelevant. The only judge that matters is your own conscience and the gods who see what humans cannot. The challenge of invisible victories is that they demand strength without reward. Anyone can act nobly when the world is watching. Politicians make generous speeches. Generals perform acts of bravery in front of their men. Leaders project calm during crises. All because an audience is present. But to act nobly when unseen, when the only witness is your own soul, requires deeper strength. The Stoics called this integrity, living as if always observed, even when alone. In that sense, invisible victories are the purest victories, because they are not corrupted by the desire for applause. We can think of invisible victories as seeds. A single act of restraint, forgiveness, or courage may seem small, but it plants something within the soul. Over time, these seeds grow into character. And character is destiny. The general who restrains anger in private is less likely to abuse power in public. The parent who forgives a spouse in silence teaches children by example, shaping their future. The citizen who resists hatred in his heart makes society less cruel, even if no one notices. Each invisible victory contributes to a foundation on which visible peace can be built. Contrast this with visible victories purchased at the expense of the soul. A nation may win a war, but if its people become bitter and vengeful, the victory rots from within. A man may dominate a workplace, but if his conscience is restless, he has gained nothing. A family member may win an argument, but if trust is broken, the victory is hollow. The Stoics teach us to weigh victories not by appearances, but by consequences. Does this triumph make me more virtuous or less? Does it strengthen my soul or weaken it? If the answer is the latter, then what looks like victory is defeat in disguise. Epictetus was blunt. It is not he who reviles you or strikes you who insults you, but your opinion that these things are insulting. If we absorb this, then every insult becomes an opportunity for an invisible victory. To remain unshaken is to win. To respond with calm is to win. To refuse to let another dictate your inner state is to win. These victories are quiet, unnoticed by the crowd, but they are absolute. For no enemy can take them from you. The world prizes conquest of land, wealth, or reputation, but the Stoics prize conquest of the self. And in truth, self-conquest is harder. Armies can be trained, resources marshaled, strategies drawn. But the mind resists discipline, passions rebel, pride refuses surrender. To conquer yourself requires a lifetime of battles, fought daily, often without recognition. Yet those who persevere earn a crown more enduring than laurel, the crown of inner freedom. So let us remember, the greatest victories are not the ones the world sees, but the ones no one notices. They do not bring applause, but they bring peace. They do not fill history books, but they fill the soul with dignity. They are victories of restraint, patience, mercy, courage, and wisdom. And though invisible to others, they are radiant within, lighting the path of the one who walks with integrity. Every age longs for peace, and yet every age is consumed by conflict. Nations sign treaties, families reconcile, individuals make promises, but the cycle begins again. Quarrels rise, divisions deepen, battles flare. The Stoics would tell us that this endless cycle exists because we look for peace in the wrong place. We search for it in laws, in leaders, in the behavior of others, in circumstances that can never be fully controlled. But true peace, they taught, is not something we receive from the world. It is something we cultivate within. And when we cultivate it, we carry it into the world as a light that cannot be extinguished. Marcus Aurelius sat on the throne of the most powerful empire of his time, surrounded by constant wars on the borders, intrigues in the Senate, and conspiracies in his household. If anyone had reason to despair of peace, it was he. Yet his meditations are not cries of a weary ruler, but instructions to himself to remain calm, patient, and just, no matter the turmoil outside. His example shows us that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of clarity, courage, and virtue within the storm. This is the peace the Stoics call us to, not a fragile stillness that collapses when the world stirs, but a fortress of the soul that stands unshaken in chaos. To live with philosophical peace is to fight battles differently. It does not mean refusing to stand for justice or allowing evil to triumph. The Stoics were not cowards. Epictetus, once a slave, spoke fiercely against cruelty and ignorance. Seneca wrote to guide a young emperor toward mercy instead of tyranny. Marcus Aurelius led armies when Rome demanded defense. But they all insisted that the manner of fighting must be guided by reason, not by passion. Peace does not mean passivity, it means purpose. It is the ability to enter conflict without being consumed by hatred, to resist injustice without becoming unjust, to endure loss without collapsing into despair. This Stoic peace begins with humility. We are not gods. We cannot command the actions of others or the tides of history. The man who expects the world to obey his will is doomed to constant frustration. But the one who accepts the limits of his control finds serenity even in hardship. You have power over your mind, Marcus wrote, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. To embrace this truth is to disarm half of conflict before it begins, for so much of our turmoil comes from demanding that the world be what it cannot be. The second element of philosophical peace is discipline. The world is noisy, and conflict constantly seeks to pull us into its storm. Outrage sells, anger spreads, fear manipulates. To resist these forces requires daily training of the mind, reflection at night, preparation in the morning, moderation in all things. A soldier who fails to train cannot withstand the enemy. A soul that fails to discipline itself cannot withstand conflict. Peace is not found by chance, but forged through practice, like armor hammered in the fire until it holds against attack. The third element is compassion. The Stoics remind us that all humans share the same nature. Even those who oppose us, insult us, or wrong us do so because they are ignorant of the good. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The wrongdoer has done wrong to himself." To see this is to replace hatred with pity, resentment with understanding. Compassion does not excuse injustice, but it prevents the infection of hatred from spreading into our own hearts. Without compassion, peace decays into cold detachment. With compassion, peace becomes a living force that heals even as it resists. The fourth element is courage. Peace is not maintained by avoidance, but by strength. The Stoics called us to face death, loss, and hardship without fear, for fear enslaves us more than chains. To live in peace is to face life's blows without trembling, to look at the worst that could happen and say, "I can endure this." Courage silences fear, and when fear is silenced, conflict loses its sharpest weapon. From humility, discipline, compassion, and courage arises the Stoic vision of peace, a state of being untouchable by the chaos of the world, steady in storms, radiant in darkness. This peace is not grand or theatrical. It is quiet, like a flame that refuses to be extinguished by the wind. It is invisible, like a fortress hidden in the mind, but though invisible, it transforms everything it touches. A person who carries this peace into their family cools quarrels before they ignite. A leader who embodies it prevents nations from rushing blindly into war. A citizen who lives it strengthens society from within, thread by thread, choice by choice. And so, the Stoics call us not to wait for peace to be delivered by rulers or by chance, but to become agents of it ourselves. Each of us is a soldier in this hidden war, not against enemies abroad, but against the passions that destroy us from within. Each act of restraint, each moment of forgiveness, each choice of patience is a victory for peace. These victories may not make headlines, but they ripple outward, unseen yet powerful, shaping the destiny of families, communities, and nations. The final truth is this: there will always be conflict. Human nature will not change. Wars will continue, quarrels will flare, injustice will persist. But we have a choice. We can meet conflict as slaves of anger, fear, and pride, or we can meet it as stoic warriors, calm, steady, unshaken. We cannot choose a world without battles, but we can choose how we fight them, and in doing so, we choose what kind of world we leave behind. Therefore, let this be our call, to cultivate peace not as a dream, but as a discipline, not as a gift, but as a practice. To rise each day prepared not only for conflict, but for victory of a different kind, the victory of clarity over confusion, of reason over rage, of virtue over vice. This is the Stoic path. This is the peace philosophy offers. Not a peace dependent on treaties or chance, but a peace carried in the heart, unyielding and eternal. And when the battles of our age roar around us, as they surely will, let us stand firm. Let us be the calm in the storm, the rock against the wave, the voice of reason in the clamor. For though the world may never be free of conflict, we can be freed within it. And in that freedom lies the greatest victory of all, the victory that does not fade, that cannot be taken, the victory of a soul at peace. Now, if any part of this message has been helpful to you, leave us your like and comment, helping the algorithm recommend it to someone who needs it at this time. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new videos. And if you look through the videos we've already uploaded, you're sure to find something to take with you. Have a good day.